This is Joe Ravitz. I'm the global HR leader for Chubb, and I'm joining you again this week from my home in New Jersey. So many of us are in, I think, the 7th week of working from home. And even though our jobs are secure and most of us are very busy, there is this heightened level of anxiety that many of us are feeling due to the uncertainty surrounding the health crisis and when and if things will return to normal, and the short and long-term impacts on our families and friends, on our company, and even the economy. So as we considered topics for the Taking Care series, our leaders felt that coping with and helping others cope with anxiety was a top priority. Carolyn Kennedy, Claudine Wolf, and I spent a couple of days talking with psychologists and well-being experts, and we were lucky to find Dr. Kelly Watts, who is joining us for the sessions today and tomorrow, and will be with us a couple of more times during May. Kelly is a psychotherapist and a resilience coach, and she's worked in the U.S. and in Europe, and has tackled the topic of anxiety from a number of different angles. She's a personal counselor, a leadership coach, and a trainer. Kelly's married and has a 7-year-old son and 2 stepdaughters, aged 28 and 30, and she's joining us today from her home in Houston, Texas. So welcome, Kelly.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really delighted to be here.
So Kelly, I think maybe to start our conversation, I'd like to pose a question. So many of us have family members and friends who may have more challenging personal situations than we do, and yet we're still having trouble sleeping or concentrating. Some of us are less patient or more emotional and generally have less energy. Is all of that normal?
Absolutely. The short version is yes. I think anxiety in particular is just what we think, the way we think of it as a patterned response to uncertainty, right? And we have this tendency to judge our own emotions and judge our own experience and tell ourselves, well, I shouldn't be anxious. I'm safe. My job is secure. My family is healthy, and minimize what we're going through. When in fact, I don't know a single person on the globe that's been spared from this uncertainty that we're all dealing with in the short and long term. So absolutely, I think our brains want to know what to expect because it's our brain's job to keep us safe. And so, of course, we're in a heightened state of looking forward to try to figure that out.
So if anxiety is normal, then why do we talk about tackling anxiety as if it's a bad thing?
I think a couple things in my mind go on. Number one, we don't like to feel uncomfortable. As humans, we are wired to put ourselves in a more comfortable state, right? And so we are up against so many learning curves right now, none of which we chose. Right? If I choose to learn Spanish or take on a cooking class or work on my relationship, usually it's an engaged, conscious process that I choose to start. And so I'm in this proactive state of I'm aware that I'm not going to be no good at tennis when I start, but I'm going to do it anyway, right? Because I want the end goal. This was a forced effort. And we're on 800 learning curves. Just the virtual part alone includes probably 6, right? Learning curves. And so I think to recognize that it doesn't feel good to not feel proficient at something. And that brings up a state of unrest for most people. You know, the brain has 3 jobs. It's to keep our body moving and functioning, to process information and store the things we learn, and to keep us safe. And so when we feel discomfort, our brain is sending an alarm bell saying, get out of this state. This isn't okay. You're not safe. And so we can end up with this ticker tape of negative thoughts about, the future, uncertainty. It might not be lack of physical safety. It might be worry about yourself or a family member and their health. It might be financial. It might be just global. And so I think from the macro to the micro, there are so many genuine areas of concern that it's not just amplified and unfounded at the moment. But what I think it's important to remember, as much as we don't enjoy the state of discomfort, it's really important to remember that no growth, no innovation, no creativity is possible if we don't push ourselves out of our comfort zones.
So when do we know when our anxiety has gotten to the point of being unhealthy or unproductive?
Yeah, I like to think of it as if you have worked on tools to center yourself. So those tools look like physical tools, like are you managing your sleep? Are you being conscious about your nutrition and your exercise? Are you managing the news? We'll come to a little bit more on this a little later, but if you're being conscious in the efforts to manage your anxiety, and you're either not able to apply those tools or they're not working, then it's probably time to, over a period of time, you say that. But we're all having waves right now. I don't know one person. I'm friends with lots of therapists, and we're human as well. And everybody's sending up flares at different times. And, no one's immune to this experience. And so I think there's the normal part that we spoke about a minute ago. But if it becomes prolonged and you're unable to function in your roles, if you're being obstructive in your family interactions to the point where it's going to damage a relationship, if you're not able to perform in your job over days and weeks, more than just everybody has a moment and an hour in a day that they may need to go take a walk and put things down. But if it becomes extended, I think that's the time to think about, should I have a referral for the EAP program and get some support from a counselor, or at the very least talk to a trusted friend, or speak to my doctor. Depends on how extreme it is.
In week 1 of this series, we talked with Dr. Elise Truggerman, who talked about using calm practices like breathing exercises and meditation as a way to help us cope, which works for some people and maybe not for others. So can you talk about other ways that you have found to be effective in tackling anxiety and really helping cope during this time of uncertainty?
Sure. I think calm practices work for everyone. It's just that my calm practices might not work for you and your calm practices might not work for me. So when I'm working with people, we work hard to come up with a robust list of things that you're doing that fill you up. Your list it's okay if your list looks very different from mine. For extroverts, for example, it might involve a lot of connection. For introverts, it might involve a lot of solo time. You have your cliche self-care things that are spa related, many of which aren't accessible to us right now. And so a lot of self-care practices that people had as routine, gyms and things like that, they might have adapted and created a home gym, but they might also have just let that go by the wayside. So that's my caveat to the calm practices. I think we just need to think more broadly about that term and not get stuck in what the lists on the internet say to do, right? And so really, I call the process dating yourself. And so the problem, if you were dating yourself, where would you take yourself? What would you buy yourself? What meal would you choose? Who would you be with? What setting would you be in? Would that be a picnic in the park or a crowded festival or a date night in at home, right? Some of which are accessible now, but this is a process that I've done outside of the context of a pandemic. And so it's a practice and an exploration practice to go through that and really figure out, for example, one of the examples I always use is when I take the time to make my cup of coffee the way I truly like it. I have a milk frother, I like my almond milk, I put a dash of cinnamon. And if I sit down and have that cup of coffee, it really is a moment of self-care for me. I'm really present to the experience. I get, sometimes you just get the right ratio of everything and it's just a lovely cup of coffee. I can put the same exact recipe into a travel mug, head out the door when I'm going to the office, or I've noticed some days I'll take it as I walk the dog. It's not the same experience. It's just a neutral, it's not bad, it's fine, but it doesn't count to fill me up in the same way, right? What most people notice is that we need to be, when I use the word mindful, I just mean present. Being present on purpose, right? Usually we need to be in a present state to actually let things fill us up. If we're checked out, it just won't have the same currency, right? And so first and foremost, that exploration of what are my calm practices. For some people, it might be, I worked with someone one time where it was putting on heavy metal and headbanging around their living room, which that would not calm me down, but it was effective for them, right? So we really try to break the mold on what you think is supposed to calm you and pay attention to the impact that your activities and interactions have in actuality on you, right? So let's start there. And then I know I'm still a long-winded way to get to the other part of the question is, she touched on breath work. What we know about the nervous system is that when your brain gets in that state of life is not okay, DEFCON, this is alert, 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 abort. The physiology of what happens in that state is that your energy goes to your extremities, because from an evolutionary standpoint, we had to be ready to fight or run, right? And so what's missing, usually people experience problems in their core, right? So brain fog, difficulty focusing, heart palpitations possibly, and digestion is actually not as effective. So people might start to have some gastrointestinal symptoms, right? Because your body's just not working as effectively because it's busy, ready to keep you safe. That's old brain from way before, and it doesn't know that we're not actually in the threat of danger. Most of us in the present moment are not in an actually dangerous situation. So the two ways we know, one, Dr. Trugerman touched on in terms of breath work. I would also like to add that it's really important to get the breath deep into the belly, because most of things, we therapists love to live in the gray, right? We don't want to be in the black and white. However, when we're talking about the autonomic nervous system, it really is light switch, it's on or off. And so two ways I know to help people learn to hack and manually override that system and turn on the parasympathetic nervous system, which says, I'm okay. Number one, deep, deep belly breaths. So I always have people put one hand on their chest and one hand on below their belly button. And it does take practice. It sounds simple, but it's not easy to teach your body to bypass your chest and go to the belly. So whenever I'm, coaching someone to start using a meditation app, that's one of the things that I say, they might tell you just to notice your breath. If you're feeling anxious, I would encourage you to get your breath down low and deep. And the other huge piece that I probably do most of my work around is the thought piece. We have estimated 50 to 70,000 thoughts a day. It's just, we're getting bombarded with thoughts. And if we haven't recognized that they're not all true, even though they feel very real, then we live in a state of reaction to those automatic thoughts, right? And so an automatic thought, if someone didn't return an email that you sent to them, might be they're upset, that content, my report wasn't good enough, it was late, they hate me. It can go all kinds of, you can really go down a rabbit hole, right? All of which are just thoughts. And so I like to teach people a process where, and it's an age-old process. Cognitive behavior therapy refers to it as cognitive restructuring. It's Brene Brown's Rising Strong process, where I like that language is so much more relatable, I think, because it's talking about the story we make up in our heads, recognizing that it's a story. And where that plays out, let's imagine that I was on a walk. It's raining right now, so let's imagine I was on a walk with my son this morning, and the sky starts to cloud over. Let's say we're away from home at a park, and we're going to the grocery store after. And I see the clouds roll in, and I think we're about a mile from the car, and we're about to get dumped on. I have a very intense, energetic, and happy child who is quite distractible. He's 7. And it would be common for him to be on the path, curious about what he's finding, and it might be difficult for me to redirect him and get him back. What can happen in our minds in those moments when things aren't going to plan? I can be thinking, we're going to get rained on, we're going to be wet, we don't have a change of clothes, then I really don't want to go to the grocery store also wet. On and on and on. Basically, this isn't going to be ruined. This is going to be terrible, and I need to control it. In which case, then my responses to him, when he's trying to literally stop and smell the flowers, is, come on, because I'm operating from a reality that is just a thought. And so learning just to recognize it's just a thought. It's not necessarily true, and it's certainly not me and who I am. Once you let, and so then the next step is don't judge it. Right? Try to forgive yourself for having that thought, because let's say, the classic one of, a friend's late to meet you or your husband's late for dinner. The assumption that you initially make, maybe right, maybe wrong, but forgive yourself for that coming up. It's just your brain trying to make sense of the world around you, and that's its job. And so try not, a lot of people get bogged down in why do I jump to worst case scenario? Why am I such a pessimist? And I find that actually impedes the process. So simply saying, my brain's doing a good job trying to keep me safe. Thank you, brain. But I'm going to take this different path. So just notice it, forgive or don't judge it. And you recognize, you name it. I'm having the thought. I love the sentence. I'm having the thought that we're going to get soaked. I'm having the thought that he's being inconsiderate. I'm having the thought that my boss doesn't like my work. And so when you start to use language like I'm having the thought, story I'm making up, it takes responsibility for the potential of that not being true. Right? And then the most important part of the process is obviously choose again. If we're going to be narrators in the future of our life, and we don't have a crystal ball or some sort of powers that no one I know, why not narrate something more positive and live from possibility, right? So when someone's late coming home, you think, ooh, maybe they had an exciting opportunity on, and they got stuck at work over something that's good. Maybe, or something more important. And I think the more useful one is also, maybe it has nothing to do with me. 90% of things that go on in life have zero to do with us. And so if my boss didn't reply to me, maybe she's putting out a different fire. Maybe something else is going on completely unrelated to our interaction, right? And so creating those alternative potential scenarios teaches us to question the validity of those automatic thoughts. And that alone, just being in the awareness that it feels real, but it may not be true, is a skill that will serve everyone well, in my opinion. And I think the last point is just that it's a practice. I don't think anybody, even the people that teach this and live and breathe it, no one just thinks the more positive thought 100% of the time, right? And so be kind to yourself and know that this is the dance, and that you begin again and you choose again over and over and over.
Good. And I'm guessing, if I go back to the example you gave of your son and the walk in the rain, if you had said, instead of just hurrying him along, if you said, hey, I'm worried it's going to rain and we're going to get soaked, so let's hurry up, you wouldn't be transferring your anxiety to him, right, in a way that he can't help with.
And
he might get it and walk faster.
And expecting him to live in my, potentially true, but potentially false reality. Right? And what I've experienced actually with my son is oftentimes he will offer me a different solution. He might say, it might be fun to get wet, or, and encourage me to shift the plan and be okay with that. Because I think children have an innate ability to go with things.
Which really brings me to probably my last question before we open it up. And that is that in the subheading for our discussion today, we talked about the solution is contagious. So if we've got a son or a daughter or a partner at home, anyone we live with at home, who is struggling with anxiety, how can the solutions that we've talked about that might work for us be contagious in helping them deal with their anxiety?
Absolutely. We know from research. There's even research on mindfulness practice. If I'm teaching my clients mindfulness-based practices, they do 50% better in their overall outcomes if I'm also practicing as a clinician, right? And so you can imagine how that translates into the home where we're interacting now a lot with each other. if you think about when we're around certain people, our shoulders go up. And when we're around certain people, we relax, just because the state they're typically in, right? And so if we commit to just taking a few breaths, it doesn't have to be, I remember one of the first books I read on mindfulness was all this great research. I really felt committed. And then you get to the end and it said, now I want you to commit an hour and a half a day. I was like, peace out, not doing it. Doesn't work for my life, right? It just doesn't work for my life. And so, but the research on like digestion, for example, is that 30% better nutrient absorption if you take 3 breaths before a meal. Just 3 breaths. And so, and one of the things I've been encouraging people during this experience is that, if mindfulness is just paying attention on purpose, you don't have to sit in a room by ourselves on a cushion. You can play Legos with your kid or go for a walk with your dog or, really enjoy that cup of coffee. That's paying attention on purpose, right? So, but if we're noticing someone in our life we think is anxious, number one, just try to be compassionate in your mind about what might be going on for them, because this is coming up in different ways for different people. And I think it can come across as anxiety, can come across as irritable, it can come across as down, it can come across as frustrated or numb. It can manifest in so many different ways. So I think first and foremost, just think compassionately. Is this challenging behavior that I'm experiencing possibly their difficulty coping with this situation? And can I cut them some slack? Okay? Never in the history of people being upset has it helped someone who's activated to tell them to calm down. And yet, as a society, what do? We continue to tell people calm down, right? Usually that's an escalating comment. So de-escalating interaction would be, hey, how can I help? Help me understand what's going on. And they may even be attacking you, but if you can stay grounded and take it less personally to the whole body of work, right? And just know that we're all struggling in different ways. I think that's helpful in terms of you'll be less reactive.
Great advice. Carolyn, we probably have time for a couple of questions. Let me turn it over to you so you can let us know what's come in.
Sure. Great. So there is one here, and Kelly, maybe this goes to the topic of de-escalation, but the question is, anxiety for me often presents in anger. Are there any tips that can help with that?
Sure. So the breath work will help you just put a pause between what I call, a reaction is internal and it happens instantaneously, and we don't always have control over that. So we may have an angry reaction to something. What we want to do is put a pause between our reaction and our response so that the people around us don't necessarily get that first version. They get an edited version. In my experience, and most of the people I work with, you have to be practicing taking those breaths and getting into your, paying attention on purpose part of your brain. You have to be doing that in a preventative way on the days that aren't even that difficult, in the moments that aren't even that difficult, so that then your mind knows how to shift gears, right? There's literally a part of your brain that the more intentional breathing you do, it's like a muscle whose job is to put your attention where you want it to be instead of where it automatically goes. And so every time you take an intentional breath, it's like doing a rep for that muscle. And so when you come into the kitchen and the dishes are everywhere and you're on a break and you're working 18 hours a day and you want to explode at a family member, if you've taken those breaths that morning, the rest of the day, you can take a beat and think, I do need to talk to them about this. It's not acceptable. It's stressful for me. When's the best time? What's the best approach? And be more intentional with the feedback. So it's constructive.
The news is a big trigger for me. I didn't watch any news last week and my sleep improved, but I struggle with wanting to keep informed and also protect myself. Any suggestions for that?
For sure. I'll share my personal approach just in case it's helpful, because I'm somebody that the news doesn't serve me. I noticed the day that I chose to get updated in the past week, my sleep was hugely impacted. So I said to my husband about, I've lost track, 3-4 weeks ago, for the record, there are no choice points coming up. I'm a big believer in making informed decisions, but I don't have any decisions to make at the moment. I'm not opening my office or considering it. I'm not trying to decide if I'm going on a trip. So there's really no reason for me to be tapped in to the global experience or even my city's experience. There's just not. There's not a vote coming up. There's no reason for me to take in that information in real time. So I said about 3-4 weeks ago, just so everyone knows, I'm not going to be checking the news mostly. So if there's anything important or an update, for example, Houston implemented a 30-day must wear a mask if you're outside of your house that started this week. And so both my husband and my brother said to me, hey, just so you making sure you're aware, if you go to the grocery store, it's mandated now, you have to wear a mask. So I let people around me know, can you give me a heads up with the important updates that I need to be aware of? And I ask for that support from the people around me who are less activated by the news, and I know they're checking more often for their own choice, by their own choice, right? Other thing to note is that information that was important came across my awareness in so many ways. People are talking about the news, and you can't help but come across the important pieces. And so I would ask yourself, what do you need to know? Are you concerned about New York because you have a family member there? Are you, and really ask yourself, which piece of the news do I need to be aware of? And is there a way that I can get a kind of non-dramatic version of that information? And then question how often, what's the frequency and duration that I need to be exposed to that? Is once a week enough? At the beginning, I think a lot of people were really, I got a lot of resistance from people when we were talking about this. I have a hard time thinking anyone needs to check the news more than once a day for 10 minutes. Right? And when I get somebody who wants to push back on that, I say, it's your life. You do what you want, but I want you to take responsibility for the impact it's having on you. In the same way we would, if every time I ate dairy, it gave me a stomach ache, I need to take responsibility for the fact that my body doesn't like it. And so I think we need to start to take responsibility also for the impact that certain people and certain activities and certain information has on us, and to what extent is reasonable, unplug. And I think it's more possible than most people give themselves permission for.
I'm sorry we don't have more time for questions, but the good news is Kelly's back with us tomorrow. So Kelly, thank you for joining us today. I know tomorrow's session will be interesting because it's taking this topic from the perspective of a manager. So how does a manager recognize anxiety in members of the team, and how can managers help their employees cope with anxiety? And joining us for that session will be Sarah Mitchell, who is the division president of the UK and Ireland for Chubb. And so I think that's going to be a very interesting conversation, and I'll be in the audience as opposed to playing this role. So Sarah, I'm passing the baton to you, and look forward to joining tomorrow. If you're on the call today and you haven't yet registered for tomorrow's session, it's still open, and so you can still do that by going to the Taking Care series page on the Village. And there will be a replay of this session available in a couple of days' time for anybody that you want to recommend this to who may have missed it. So thanks all for joining today. And as we've been saying, as we've been signing these off, please be well and take care. Thanks again, Kelly.
Thank you.